To understand one of the most distinctive ways in which Leman Academy's model of education is unique, we need to travel back in time. Picture Europe at the height of the Industrial Revolution around 1888. Smoke is billowing up from factory chimneys. Orphans, leeries, and chimney sweeps run around the streets of major cities, hustling for any kind of work that will put food in their bellies. Yeah, it was essentially a scene from Mary Poppins, or even Mary Poppins Returns. Society was stratified. The wealthy could hire private tutors to raise up their children and give them an elite classical education. All other kids remained either illiterate or were moved through an assembly line type of program that raised serious ethical questions in the minds of any caring citizen. In France, for instance, Maria Montessori reacted to the industrialization of education and implemented an innovative and more individualized approach to schooling. Her contemporary across the English Channel was Charlotte Mason. You might wonder, what makes Miss Mason so special that she is now part of Leman Academy's approach to education? For about 100 years, she was nearly forgotten about. But in the last several decades, she has been rediscovered. First, homeschool families began reading her work and experimenting with ways to implement it for themselves. As the classical homeschool movement grew, other private schools began to adopt her methods and philosophy. Now, Leman Academy, which is committed to an approach that focuses on the whole person, is classically informed and well-balanced, gives access to the richness of her methods to anyone who walks through the doors. The beauty for us is that by making her model accessible to the public through charter schools, Leman Academy is fulfilling her vision and carrying out the same commitment to equip the less privileged with a rich and fulfilling life, just as she did. So, what were the specific ways which Charlotte Mason's stance was so bold? Well, to begin with, she could not swallow the notion that children were subhuman, nor that the poor deserved a less filling life than the elite. While few at the time would come out and say that, public education had been highly regulated and standardized. This eventually led to the stripping away of classical art, music, opportunities for movement, leisurely dialogue about the truth, and the enjoyment of nature. Sound familiar? Miss Mason took the philosophical stance that children are adults becoming. By this, she meant that the smallest child is fully capable of thinking, feeling, pondering, assessing, and enjoying all that a grown person would, at their developmental level, of course. She embraced the classical conviction that the purpose of education is to lead young people to grow in wisdom and virtue. For this reason, she was determined to provide scholars with a balanced diet in their curriculum. She believed that what scholars were to learn ought to be broad and generous. She refused to let education be stripped down to the basics that would show compliance on a standardized assessment. Rather, it ought to expose them to worlds beyond their own. If as adults they will find fulfillment in life by enjoying all that is good, true, and beautiful, they must systematically then begin to develop a well-rounded palate. The role of school, therefore, is to set a robust and nutritious banquet table on which the minds and the senses of children can feast. Through feasting on music, art, nature, history, literature, poetry, and science, she believes scholars would grow as whole people, finding new levels of meaning as they study each of the disciplines by seeing the ways in which their studies are interconnected. The ultimate goal of acquiring new knowledge is synthesis. Scholars must be able to pull it together in meaningful ways so that their relationship to truth grows as they learn. This is how she understood wisdom. Remember, wisdom and virtue are the two ends at which the arrows of a classical education have always pointed. How did Charlotte Mason seek to grow the children under her care and virtue? This is a big topic. She understood virtue as requiring internal convictions, yet she also sought to maximize the role of education in creating the conditions that will cultivate such convictions. She believed that the environment could have a role in shaping who a person becomes. She famously upheld the concept of education as an atmosphere, a discipline, a life. To guide adults becoming in their pursuit of virtuous living, Miss Mason encouraged primarily through the formation of habits. She compared good habits to the laying down of railway tracks. It will be heavy and hard at first, but once they are set, they will be useful and advantageous for the remainder of one's life. She sought to root the person's actions in their attitudes. She held that if children could learn first to hold to the right beliefs, then the right behaviors would naturally follow. The flow from intrinsic to extrinsic was mapped out by 4 sentence stems which her scholars would memorize and recite. We are, we can, we ought, we will. Who we are established what we can do. What we ought to do directs what we choose to do. This is how she leveraged the role of education in shaping virtue. Now, her contributions were not merely philosophical. Like anything lasting, they certainly addressed the ideal, and she powerfully defended her conceptual convictions. The true magic of her contribution was how it can be so directly applied to the classroom today. Don't forget, she was a practitioner. She had used her schools and teachers' college as a laboratory and fine-tuned the application of her philosophy with real children, learning under the guidance of real teachers without most of the resources and conveniences we enjoy today. What are some of her specific methods of education that Leman Academy implements? The class creed, nature studies, picture studies, music studies, recitations, copybooks, using a map within the classroom, integrating all the subjects, organizing curriculum around history, creating a timeline as a class as you go. This list is what parents today love to see in the hallways in the classroom of a Leman Academy campus. Did you know that all of this could be traced back to Charlotte Mason in England in the late 1800s? That's what makes Charlotte Mason such a good fit for us. Her philosophy and methods distill the best out of a rigorous classical education and make it accessible to anyone. Now, for you to be able to implement each of the items on this list, well, you'll have to watch some of our master teachers and learn from them. Your teammates will be able to guide you and help you as well. We know you will be able to do it. To help you, you will have a separate little training for each one. We know it takes time, and we give each teacher time to grow in each of these areas. For now, we want to make sure you understand why Charlotte Mason is a part of our model and how her contributions fit into what our scholars experience. The beauty of our model is that we are all committed to this. Parents don't have to hope they get the one teacher that does some of this. This is who we are as a school. Every scholar gets to be at the banquet table. They get to become young artists, young historians, young scientists. They get to deliver poems and speeches that have stood the test of time. We are creating the conditions in Leman schools that will raise a generation of royals. We're guiding tomorrow's leaders to grow in wisdom and virtue. Regardless of what vocations they go into, our scholars, our adults becoming, can enjoy a rich and fulfilling life because we will train their palates to love what is lovely.